Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Be Frank Talks. You may remember me from previous episodes. My name is Cody Gordon, previously on The Climb, and we are fortunate enough today to have Kyle Bloch with us in studio. Kyle is an industrial psychologist, and he is currently the head of psychology at Be Frank. Kyle, welcome.
Codes, thanks for having me today. Super excited to get chatting.
Awesome, fantastic. Very excited for our discussion today. I think all of our listeners today are going to gain a lot of direct value from our topic. And I think what will be quite valuable to everyone before is to give a bit of context into why we're having this discussion, what Kyle's role is in this discussion, and basically where we are. For those of you who have tuned in previously, you would know about It's Okay, about our previous company focusing on mental health in schools, about what we do in that area. You'd have also heard us mention quite briefly our venture into the corporate space in terms of individual well-being, team effectiveness. And we've recently launched that technology over the last year and a half. We've been building that. And Kyle has come on board as our head of psychology, as our subject matter expert. So today's topic, we're going to focus on individual well-being in the workplace, as well as team effectiveness and how overall health has a direct impact on performance and business output. So Kyle, I think an introduction on who you are, how you got here, what do you do, what do you specialize in, would be very valuable for the listeners.
Well, let me start off by saying I absolutely love what you guys are doing through It's Okay, and that's one of the primary reasons why I wanted to be involved in the project with Be Frank. I think it's so critical to be able to understand what's going on on the ground, have the finger on the pulse to be able to do any kind of interventions. As an industrial psychologist, one of the primary things that we need to understand is we need to collect data to really understand how to attend to a certain issue, challenge, and if you don't have the right data, it's a difficult point to start. So I love what you guys are doing. I think it's so critical, and I am super chuffed to be part of the team. So with that being said, I've had so many people ask me, what is an industrial psychologist? What's an organizational psychologist? And I must be honest, when I was studying every year, I came up with a new definition, but now practicing for 7 years, I can say essentially what we do as industrial psychologists is we take psychological frameworks and models, we apply them to the workplace with the whole goal of improving performance, ensuring people are feeling happy, engaged, are engaging also in meaningful work so they can then perform. Just to give you an example, because that's a very vague and kind of overarching definition. For instance, you get a theory of operant conditioning. So this operant conditioning is all about, it was put forth by Frederick Skinner. He was a behavioral psychologist. And essentially it is pairing up an action with a reward. And every time he would do this, he would actually do this with rats in a laboratory to control for various variables. He found that every time he paired the action with a reward, that action was reinforced. And this essentially set the platform for looking at incentives inside the workplace. And I'm not comparing humans to rats.
I was about to say, Carl, I hope we're not going down that direction.
Look, you want to be able to control for certain variables, but you can actually withdraw some interesting theories. And if you look at now, the workplace, it is you can look all over the place for rewards and incentivizing certain behaviors, and that leads to certain behavioral changes. So that's just a kind of an example of what we would look at, different experiments, observations, research, and apply that to the workplace.
Awesome. Very interesting. Thank you for that introduction. I think, Carlo, as you mentioned and sort of just touched on here, the area of industrial psychology, psychology in general, is very big, very broad. Why did you choose to focus on health and wellness in particular in this field?
Yeah, so it's super broad. And then I learned this when I was studying. There's so many directions you can go. You can look at recruitment and selection. You can look at training and development. You look at wellness, which is the one that is one of my big passion points. You can look at change management, organizational development. But for me, there was a particular story in mind, a particular event that occurred. I used to facilitate leadership development in the mines in Secunda. And I used to go down, we used to travel, I used to go for three or 4 days, and I would walk in a workshop of 20 odd people that have just come out of a 12-hour shift in the mines.
Wow.
And they would come out, overalls, dirt on their face, and these are coal mines we're talking about. And the whole job of a facilitator is not to just present to someone and say, hey, this is leadership model number 1, this is what you need to do. The whole idea is to bring people into the room, give them a voice, and facilitate a conversation around leadership and what their role is in leadership. And I remember one guy sitting in the front, and he was completely dejected. He never wanted to offer any of his input. I would invite him to kind of say, come, what's your opinion on this matter? And he just kept silent the whole time. So during the break, I kind of approached him just to see if everything was okay. And he opened up to me, and he essentially told me that he was depressed, he was burnt out, he couldn't even listen to what kind of content we were talking about. And this was a huge epiphany for me. And I essentially understood from seeing this and understanding that this guy wants to become a better leader, but he's not even at neutral. His health is impaired. And how can we go and start to upskill and empower people if their health isn't even if they're not flourishing through their health, through their mental wellness, flourishing through their personal lives? And that was an immediate kind of direction that I thought I should take, is looking at health first before we start to think, okay, how can we now empower people with greater skills and upskill them before we're dealing with someone who can't even factor in what their health is, or can't even listen to the content.
Absolutely. That's extremely interesting. And how long ago was that experience?
This must have been about in 2019. It would have been 2018, actually, just before COVID. And then you bring COVID in, and that's
the whole trend skyrockets.
The theme during COVID was burnout.
Absolutely. No, 100%. I think we've all seen from COVID the mental stress, the mental strain that is placed on everyone of all ages, of all backgrounds. And what's very interesting to me in that story was, what it sounds like, and going into the mines, doing these leadership training, these leadership courses. No matter how great your content is, no matter how great your leadership strategy is, no matter how great the potential of this leader, if they're not showing up as a person, if they've got other things going on, may not even be work-related, something that's happening in their personal life, some sort of mindset shift that's needed. Maybe they just need a platform to express what they're going through, that actually has a direct impact on your ability to lead, and therefore a direct impact on business performance. And I think that's a great segue into our topic, which we're going to touch base on now, which is that if your employees are not in the correct headspace, if they're not operating at the levels they need to as people, it's going to have a direct input on what they do at work, and at the end of the day, the business bottom line. And that's really, what our mission is at Be Frank, is performance through health, through healthy individuals, through healthy teams. And at the end of the day, it's the human thing to do, because we need to care about one another. We need to have empathy. We need to understand what people are going through, because we're all in this journey together. But a nice sort of bonus to that is that it makes people more effective. What we don't realize, and what we actually are realizing more often now, is that when we are in a mentally healthy space, when we feel like our well-being is at a high level, when all of our ducks are in a row, we do better, and whoever is around us benefits from that. So a few stats I'm actually going to read here, which are very interesting, which actually highlight when individual health and team health is at its peak, or when it's not doing so well, what the direct impact is on business. So quite a few stats, so bear with me, but they are interesting. So first one, 82% of employees don't report mental illness. For every 1 in 5 employees, mental illness decreases productivity. 89% of employees that receive wellness support will recommend their workplace as a good place to work. Approximately 5% of employees have missed a day or more in the last 6 months due to financial stress. 4 in 5 workers, or about 78%, report they are distracted at work due to financial stress. Depression leads to $51 billion in costs in absenteeism and $26 billion in treatment costs. Employees who feel their voice is being heard are 4.6 times more likely to perform better. For every dollar spent on employee wellness, organizations save about $6 in lower absenteeism rates. 56% of employees had fewer sick days due to wellness programs. Organizations that communicate effectively are 4.5 times more likely to retain employees. Teams with high engagement are 21% more productive and have 28% less theft. 41% reduction in absenteeism, 59% less turnover, 21% greater profitability. 89% of HR leads agree that ongoing feedback and check-ins are key for successful outcomes. 96% of employees believe that showing empathy is important to employee retention. Disengaged employees cost companies up to $550 billion a year, and 61% of employees report being burnt out in their job. I mean, those stats directly show that surely there is a correlation between individual well-being, team dynamics, and business outputs. What's your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. I mean, do you need more reason to now go and invest in your people? And I think that you mentioned that earlier, people. What is an organization at the end of the day? It's a bunch of people, and these are unique human beings with the various personalities, with the various challenges that come together for a common goal, to achieve a common goal. And you can break that up, and it gets more complex, obviously. But these numbers, I mean, if you want to summarize all of these, it decreases absenteeism, which obviously assists with costs. It increases productivity. It increases engagement. It increases morale. I mean, there's so many now hard metrics to suggest that employers, organizations need to. It should be an option. They need to start investing in their people, and not just. Even if you don't want to be the good guy, because it actually works. At the end of the day,
exactly. One way or the other, invest in your people, because whether you want to do it because you care about your people or because you want your business to be more successful, invest in your people.
Exactly. I mean, it's funny. This morning I was driving on the way, and that's why I was about 10 minutes late here. And as I was about to leave, I just heard something on my tire, and I heard flipping and flapping on my tire, and I was like, okay. I need to rush, I need to make this meeting, and I would need to go on the highway. But the risk there was, and we were discussing codes, and I was like, the risk is that my tire pops, I don't make it, I'm not alive. And something you said to me was very pertinent. You can't be healthy if you're not alive.
Yeah. Health doesn't matter if you're dead.
Health doesn't matter if you're dead. There we go. On point. So, I mean, if you look at the whole analogy, maybe even of a car. If you go on holiday, what do you do before you go on holiday? You check and you're driving or whatever, you're going to Durban or something. You check the car, you check the oil, you check the tires, you make sure the car is ready to take you and is healthy so you can have a safe trip. So why aren't we doing the same things? I mean, at the end of the day, your teams, your people, they are the means to then perform and to achieve your objectives. So why aren't you investing in that car? Why aren't you checking the tires always? Why aren't you checking the oil? If that car is healthy enough to take you to a position, to a certain destination, then you are achieving those goals. So again, I don't want to keep comparing humans to cars and rats.
I was about to say cars are better than rats.
We're upgrading, yeah. But essentially, we need the metrics are there, and if we are investing, if we are checking in, we are able then to invest in the vehicle that's going to take us towards performance, that's going to get the outcomes that we're actually looking for.
Absolutely. I think that's a great analogy. And I think, beyond this, especially after COVID and, Gen Z entering the workplace and all of these factors, do you think the demand, because, obviously, 10, 15, even 5 years ago, pre-COVID, well-being, team dynamics, all these types of things, they were important, but they weren't highlighted as a major focus. Obviously, now the trend is increasing. Do you think a major reason for this has to be with the demand that is put on employers by the actual workers? The new people into the workforce with so many options, remote work, being able to work, so many more options, countries around the world. Do you think the demands of these people seeking jobs are a lot higher now, that employers actually have to keep up with these demands just to retain or just to even have a conversation with the top talent? Because now top talent is demanding so much more. that you're not even going to have the opportunity to bring, these potential employees on if that's not what your culture is about.
No, absolutely. So you hit on a few pertinent points there. That I mean, if you look at the trends at the moment, if you look at various recruitment websites, they report that most employees these days, and you mentioned Gen Z, millennials, they are looking for primarily flexibility. So, I mean, with the introduction of COVID, that brought on kind of a hybrid working from home. A lot of people are looking for that flexibility. A lot of people are looking for investment into their health. If you look at the top tech companies, which usually lead the themes with regards to employee perks or employee investments, there's budgets for well-being. There's a budget to say you have a certain amount you can spend on either a psychologist, you can spend on it doesn't have to be a psychologist, it could also be just a retreat or any investment in your health, but it has to be spent on your health, of course. So there is, I would say, more demand. You look at some of your bigger corporates that maybe are slower to reach there, but they're still investing in employee wellness programs. For me, the primary thing isn't about necessarily the demand, it's about how many people use it. So the demand obviously brings the supply, and the supply could be in the form of employee wellness. It could be the introduction of, we've got someone on site for you, we've got technology that can assist you. But at the end of the day, how many people are using that technology? How many people are using the psychologist that's people are allowed to go and see, or the counselor or the financial planner? So there's, and you mentioned it earlier, there's a kind of, I would say, fear or stigma behind disclosing these issues for being weak, for being that person that could be stigmatized, because mental wellness still isn't, I would say, at a point where people can speak so freely about it.
Absolutely. And an interesting point there that you touched on is, okay, cool, we've got these programs, you can go and chat to a psychologist. I think 2 points I want to touch on. The first one is, let's say you're not a Silicon Valley tech company that's raised, $10 million, and you don't have a budget to spend on, psychology sessions, etc., etc., etc. What else can you do? Because, to focus on well-being, team dynamics in order to aid performance. Because for me, a culture, there's perks and then there's culture, right? Perks are, you got table tennis, you got PlayStation, you've got a smoothie bar, etc., etc. What can these smaller companies do that don't have the budget that some of the other companies do to focus on things like a productive work culture, a culture of well-being?
Yeah, so you you don't necessarily have to invest in the bells and whistles. These are nice little perks that people can distract people during the work week, which can be very important to have those intentional breaks. I always say go back to basics. I always say that at the end of the day, you're engaging with a human being. There's obviously multiple levels. There's the leader. There's the one-on-one leader to employee or employee to employee. There's the leader to the team. There's teams to teams, what you would call intrapersonal. And then there's obviously the dynamic of the whole system of the organization. But if you just want to go back to basics, it's treating a human like a human. It's listening to the human. And I always say this, listening is a skill.
Sure.
And I've said this to you plenty of time, guys, is listening. Often people listen to respond, not to understand.
100%.
And you mentioned empathy earlier. And if people just start listening to understand, and that means you stop the agenda in your head and you start to listen and try and put your place in that person's shoes to understand where they're at. Now, this doesn't excuse non-performance. This doesn't excuse employees that aren't there to perform, aren't there to be engaged and essentially do the task that they're there, that at the end of the day are being paid. What it does is it invites the employee in to say that you're willing to work with them to help navigate the challenges. And those challenges could be both work-based and it could be a personal base.
100%.
But as soon as you start listening to understand, the person across from you kind of gets permission to speak freely and without feeling judged. So I always say get back to basics. Look, there's a whole literature on, we can talk about going into employee wellness, focusing on various levels, individual, group, collective. But if every individual commits to listening to understand and listening to support, already that's I would say that's a nice pivot in the right direction.
100%. I think that's some great advice. And anyone listening, if you don't have the budget for, whatever you think you may need, start off with as Kyle says, listen to understand, have a conversation, open up a chat. And I think, a lot of these things can be quite intimidating. I don't really know how to approach this situation, but I think the thing that I always go back to is your intention, right? If your intention is good and pure, then, that's what really matters. And that generally at the end of the day, that helps the conversation move forward. A point you touched on earlier as well is if you do adopt a technology or some sort of program, the uptake is obviously what matters. What is the usage like? And that can come down to a lot of things. What is the technology like? What is the value added for the employees, for the team leads, the C-level executives, all those types of things. But beyond sort of the technicalities of the uptake of these products, how important is the initial culture of that company in terms of uptake? Because, generally in a company, if you're a new employee, you will take the shape of that culture in order to rise above, in order to rise to the top. So if your company is struggling to adopt this way of being, and that's where you want to move towards, is a company that doesn't necessarily have this focus on well-being or on team effectiveness, team dynamics, are they going to struggle with uptake of these types of programs, of these types of technology, purely because of their current culture?
You raise a very good point, and that culture drives behavior at the end of the day. If you let's just look at an example. So if you have a very results-driven, hard, rigid organization that's never really visited the idea of employee wellness, and all of a sudden you decide, okay, let's bring some consultants in, let's invest, let's send out a survey and understand the lay of the land with regards to employee wellness. All of a sudden now you've got a culture that originally didn't understand any employee wellness, and you now sending out a random survey about employee wellness. And now people immediately start to build suspicion and say, what's this for? Why am I doing this? Often we say industrial psychology, or generally when you, even organizational development, there's a way of approaching various diagnostics when you go into an organization. And essentially, I've seen this play out. I remember doing a burnout survey. It was also around employee wellness, and there was a very low uptake for the survey because one, people don't understand what it's about. Is this? That's
quite interesting because a survey, what uptake's there in that? You get the survey, you do it. But for there to be such low uptake in just a general survey shows how troubled that culture is already.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, would you say fear? It's a fear-based element.
Fear, and it's people thinking, what's this information going to be used for? Is this information confidential? Is this information anonymous? Even if you say it on the survey, there's this fear that who's seeing this information at the end of the day. There's also the fear of, is this information going to be used to rate my performance? Or is it going to show because I'm suffering with mental illness that I'm weak, or that I won't get a responsibility anymore? So there's so much that's going on in the employee's mind, and that's informed by the culture, as you said before.
Absolutely. So a safe place hasn't been provided or created for this employee to focus on things like well-being and things like that.
Exactly.
Oh, that's super interesting. And I think also beyond that, you touched on surveys and things like that. What are current programs that are implemented to focus on these types of things? Because generally what we found since we've launched Be Frank is that companies, their current approaches will be to release a survey, and they'll do a survey, once every 6 months, maybe once a year, some even every 2 years, every 3 years, every 5 years, whatever their approach may be. But what we found is that if your approach to what is happening within the team, what is happening within the company, what is happening with individuals, happens every 6 months, happens, every year, every 2 years, your approach to that is very reactive instead of proactive. And it doesn't necessarily cement the culture that you think you're trying to create, because, like we know and like we say, culture is what you do. It's not what you say. So with Be Frank, the technology that we've built, we've made sure that this becomes part of the daily culture of the organization, where employees are giving a voice every single day. How am I feeling? How am I feeling about my personal life, about work? How do I feel about my team dynamics, my leader? All these types of things. So do you think the approach then for companies that are wanting to have this focus on well-being, team dynamics, and how they relate to performance is to implement a program that has a more regular focus? Because if it's more regular, employees will at least subconsciously realize, oh, well, I did this today, I did this yesterday, I did this a month ago, I did this a week ago, I did this a year, we've been doing this for the last year. This is clearly something that is important in our company. All it's doing is helping me work better. I see my company cares about me. I've seen changes in my behavior. Our team's performing better. This is what our company does. So how important is that regular focus?
So that's one of the things about Be Frank that I absolutely love, is that real-time data. And I'll tell you why, is because if you look at it, there's when a team gets together, and I think it was Kurt Lewin who said that there's various phases of forming a team, and there's the forming, the storming, norming, and so forth. But that just gives it a example that an organization is always in different states. Teams are always in different states. Individuals are always in different states. There's always flux. There's always changing emotions. There's always changing objectives, changing tasks, etc. And often what you find is that someone, as you say, will take a measure 6 months, take another one biannually or yearly or whatever it is, and they'll get a picture of that point in time. But it doesn't necessarily give you the real-time data. And when you look at teams, one of the key factors there is this evolving, emergent kind of themes that come about. Now, if you look at behavior change, and if you look at any intervention where you want to achieve behavioral change towards more of a desired result, look at something like a Fitbit, or we were talking about your Samsung smartwatch. That's something that gives you real-time data every single day. And we've seen how much change that brings on people. Like before this Fitbit became around, I mean, what the hell was 10,000 steps to me? That had nothing to do with anything for me. Now, cool, I can go and play the game board. It's fun, whatever.
Get a free smoothie.
But I'm getting up. I'm actually getting up.
Sure.
I'm walking around. I'm doing it. If you look at another example, maybe insurance, the black box or whatever that measures how you drive, gives you real-time data how you drive. Look, I know some people just threw the black box away because it was making them drive like a nanny or something, but
so only relates to that one.
Not getting your rewards, eh?
Yes, it did.
So these are based on getting real-time data to be able to measure it and then use that data for a certain purpose. What I love about Be Frank is it is real-time data. It's day on, day out, very user-friendly, quick. That's the other thing. You want to make this as seamless as possible. How are you feeling today? I mean, just getting that piece of data for industrial psychologists like myself and the teams that go into organizations, that data is priceless. I mean, and you can utilize that data. You can look at themes, and these are real themes that are going on. Once you start doing that periodically, you lose so much information that can allow you then to focus far more on what you actually need to do as opposed to what you think the issue is. There's a massive problem, I would say, in organizations with the concept of cognitive dissonance and the idea of, I think this is the issue, as the employer would say. They go in and spend all this money on certain intervention, and it actually has nothing to do with the actual issue.
Sure.
And there's a dissonance between what is actually going on and what people think is going on. And how do you bridge that gap is through the data, the real-time data that you receive.
Absolutely. No, extremely fascinating. So for any organizations or team leads or anyone listening, the ability to actually focus on the real problem comes down to regular interventions, regular check-ins, really understanding what issues are currently being experienced in the teams, in the company, for individuals. So we obviously spoke about real-time data, and it sounds like that's really where this journey, this step towards creating this type of culture begins with is collecting this data. Obviously, you measure what you want to manage. And so that's one element of it is, okay, cool, we understand what's happening in this team. Like we know in Be Frank, you have the ability to understand across the organization. This is how our marketing team's feeling. This is where our finance team is excelling. Our technology team needs to improve in this areas. Really gives you an overall view of where certain teams are performing, where certain teams are struggling. So, okay, cool. You understand that. You've got that information, but now what do you do about it? So obviously what we've done with Be Frank is we've implemented a whole solution system on the app where different individuals understand, okay, I'm struggling with communication in my team. This is how I improve. Or a team lead sees, for example, we're really struggling with enablement in this team. Okay, this is what the app is suggesting I do to improve. We then go further with various high-touch solutions, all these types of things. But Kyle, I want to ask you, whose responsibility is it in the organization to have this focus on well-being, to have this focus on team dynamics? What is our work experience like? Is it up to the individual? Is it the team lead, the head of HR? Is it the CEO? Whose responsibility is this in the company?
So that's an interesting question. I think you need to, it could be a philosophical debate this as well. I'm just going to just put forth two kind of theories that of behavior change, essentially. So the one is a theory of planned behavior. And this essentially says that any change of behavior begins with your intention. It's a conscious choice. It's a self-determined kind of choice that I am an autonomous individual. I have agency. I can go ahead and make changes in behavior. Based on that theory, you would say each individual in the organization needs to take it on themselves to make the change they want to see, whether that be with their health, with performance, with system management, whatever outcome you're talking about. The other theory is it's put forward by Albert Bandura. He was also a psychologist, behavioral psychologist. It's called social cognitive theory. And as explained, social, so is your environment. The cognitive is your internal, your cognition, your thinking. And this essentially looks at the interaction, but he put a lot more emphasis on the environment. So having the right environment, setting the right environment, modeling the right behavior, because a lot of learned behavior, if you think as a kid as well, is learned through observation. My parents behave a certain way. It's not what they say, it's what they do. So you learn through observation. So from that point of view, you would say, no, then it's the employer, it's the leader.
Sure.
They need to set the environment. I would like to say it's a bit of both. I would like to say there's probably a bit more onus on the leader and the employer to set the environment, set the culture. Often the culture informs behavior. But then there has to be a responsibility on the individual to also take care of certain metrics. You can't expect yourself to, as an individual, to go out during the week, partying every week till late in the night, drinking, not having a good diet, not exercising, coming to work and saying, hey, why am I not healthy? How come I'm not achieving my objectives? Why did you set up a fruit basket for me to come home every morning, and smoothies and a racetrack or whatever it is, you know? So I would say it's both, but there's definitely more control, or I would say there's more a leader can do to have more of an impact on the whole team, on the whole organization.
Absolutely. I think that's spot on. And what I've seen from my own personal experience, from my own life is, growing up and actively seeking out mentors, business mentors, life mentors, all these types of people to assist me to improve. These people have advice and, they've been there, done it. And, no matter what they say to you, no matter how good their advice is, if you don't take that advice and you don't follow it, nothing's going to change. I mean, from my own life, from seeing when I actually decided to do something and took this as my own responsibility. If I don't improve this is on me. Nothing else changes until then. So I think what you're saying is spot on, that even in a work context in relation to what's happening, the onus is primarily on you to say, put your stick, your flag in the ground and say, this is what I'm doing. I need to improve this. But then on the flip side, that when you become a manager, when you become a team lead, part of that responsibility is the people side of things, managing people. People produce things. Things don't just exist by themselves. So I think that responsibility as a team lead, it cannot go unnoticed. That is part of your job. That's why you are a manager. That's why you are a leader. And as we mentioned earlier, if you as the leader, as the manager, want your team to be as productive as possible, you have to have that focus on the people within your team. You have to make sure that the environment in which they are operating in is one that allows them to be as effective as possible. So I think it really is that loop, and I'm sure it extends beyond individual and team lead to, the C-level as well. And how are they operating the company? Where are they choosing to allocate resources? Because at the end of the day, if you have a plan and you don't allocate the necessary resources to it, it's just a dream. It's not a plan.
100%.
So that focus, I think, really is everywhere. It's individual, it's team lead, and it's the organization at the top level, and what are their strategic objectives over here. Which is why when we built Be Frank, we had that focus from day one. What do I need to do as an individual to improve my work performance? As a team lead, from where I'm sitting, I need to understand what my team is going through and what do I need to do to improve that. And for the people at the top, CEO, CFO, head of HR, head of happiness, head of people, what is my company experiencing? And now, okay, we need to zone in here, we need to zone in there. These are the effective changes that we need to make. So I think we've definitely highlighted the focus and the need for these types of cultural changes, well-being, team dynamics, and how they have a direct input, a direct relation to business output. But with this being said, the data, right there in your face, undeniable, why then do quite a few organizations still not see this as a priority, as something that they need to focus on?
Absolutely. Look, you see the trend. You see wellness as a trend, but it doesn't mean that every organization is adopting it. Before I answer that, I just want to just touch on what you said just earlier, from the idea that you really need to focus on the leadership and from the top, from the C-suites, from the executive. There's that saying that the fish rots from the head. At the end of the day, it's all going to trickle down. And what's so important, and I always say this going into an organization, if there's no leadership buy-in, no employee buy-in will happen, and the actual intervention won't happen. Or at least it will happen, but it won't work. The effectiveness will go down. And often what organizations do is they'll say, let's bring in someone, a consultant, let's maybe even do this in-house. They do some campaign, they do some intervention. Great, everyone's happy, everyone's excited. You go visit that same organization 12 months, 18 months later, it's back to square one. It's back to exactly where it was. And it comes, if you bring a full circle now here to your question with regards to why no one's investing as well, is there's not a full commitment towards this idea. It's kind of a tick box exercise. Let me say I'm investing in employee ones because everyone else is doing it. Apparently the metrics will support it. But we need to actually commit from the top. We need to actually support this. We need to buy into this. We need to endorse this. And we need to show that behavior from the very top all the way through to the person who's the most customer facing or whatever, the frontline individual or the person right at I don't like saying the bottom, but the person who is
on their way up.
On the way up. Good reframe. So that's one angle. The other thing is you got a lot of people in there measuring things, and I've seen this also, this analysis paralysis thing. It's also a big issue with big data. You're collecting all this data, but you don't know what to do with the data. What I like about Be Frank is it collects the data and it actually gives it to you, and it gives you insights in the data. So then it is easier then to understand, okay, if this is the case, then there's an easy follow-on remedy or an easy follow-on kind of point of action from that data. I would also say that there's kind of a lack of knowledge about what it means to be an employee, to be a health-focused, engaged, rather organization, and it comes back to this. It's probably the human condition of immediate gratification, but all those statistics you read out earlier, that's statistics that have been collected on mostly longitudinal studies that have been realized over time, and essentially it's showing the ROI on investing in employees. But then you have employers coming in and they want to see that ROI next month.
Immediately.
I want to see it next month. I've spent all this money on giving you guys an outlet to speak to some counsel or something. Where's my performance? And we always say in industrial psychology, whenever you do an intervention, there's always a lag effect.
Sure.
And there's always a lag effect because change isn't easy.
100%.
And people are used to doing what they're doing and they love their default way of doing it. Change doesn't take time overnight. And I would even say it takes up to 12 to 18 months to actually see a full change in a full change management spectrum.
Absolutely. And I think that's completely spot on. And we've seen this firsthand with our technologies that we've released from It's Okay. Our schools that have been with us for 3 years, sometimes they're a little slow to start, but then it's sort of like a snowball effect. Like it takes a little bit, then a little bit more, then all of a sudden you've got this massive culture of just well-being being a daily focus, where if you're not getting 1,000 check-ins a day from schools, like, guys, what's happening? Is everything okay? Whereas before they would have never checked in 1,000 times throughout the year with how things are going. And that's what we're seeing with Be Frank now as well. Companies that have been with us for a couple months even are starting to make this a culture, a habit within the organization, and they're actually starting to pick up on these trends that after a week, after 2 weeks, okay, cool, is this a trend, is this a theme, is this still happening within the organization? So I think the theme of giving it time for change to happen is absolutely critical, absolutely spot on. And Carla, what are some of the most important trends and developments in the field of employee well-being, team effectiveness, and how can employees or employers stay up to date with these changes?
So look, we mentioned a bit earlier one of the trends, which is offering flexi time, offering flexibility for employees. It comes back to there's a Daniel H. Pink. He's a best-selling author of one of the books I loved. He's called Drive. And
Love that one.
Yeah, so the 3 pillars, it's purpose, autonomy, and mastery.
Yes. To
provide for motivation for an individual. And when you look at flexibility and offering employees flexibility, that's right all of a sudden under that autonomy.
Sure.
And letting that person saying essentially, this is the outcome that we're looking for, but how you go about that outcome is up to you.